Billionaire's obsession. My powerful boss number one. I've been what? I adjusted my glasses and tried to swallow, but my throat was dry as sandpaper. Promoted to executive assistant. Take your things, these papers, and go to the top floor, said Ms. Green, the HR manager, her tone as cold as the air conditioning in the office. I opened my mouth to respond, but all that came out was a croak. Sweat started to bead on my forehead. I'd hurry if I were you. Mr. Stone doesn't like to be kept waiting, she added, still focused on her computer screen, as though dismissing me was just another routine task. But I'm supposed to be working as a records clerk, I protested weakly. I'd only been at Stoneblack for 3 days, and now I was being promoted? And now, you're an executive assistant, she said, thrusting a stack of papers and an elevator fob toward me. Good luck with your short-term career. Short-term? What was that supposed to mean? Clutching the papers, I shuffled toward the elevator, my mind spinning. Should I just walk out the front door instead? Stoneblack wasn't just another corporation. It was the very company that had practically destroyed my hometown of Bedford. Their sneaky legal maneuvers had left us devastated. I'd taken the job in records specifically to dig up something, anything, that could bring them down. Now, after just 3 days, I'd somehow been catapulted into the role of executive assistant to him. Jackson Stone, CEO of Stoneblack, the billionaire who reportedly hired and fired people on a whim. A man with a reputation for being as ruthless as he was striking. I'd seen his photos online, standing at charity galas, shaking hands with government officials. And sure, I'd admit it, he was gorgeous. Tall, blonde, with piercing blue-green eyes and a perpetual scowl, like a volcano barely held in check. He looked as though he could set a room on fire with just one glare. Halfway to the elevator, my resolve faltered. What was I doing? This wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't here to play assistant. I was here to find evidence that could take down the whole operation. I turned sharply and walked straight into someone. The impact sent my papers flying. My bag fell to the floor, spilling its contents everywhere. Oh, I'm so sorry, I stammered, dropping to my knees to gather everything. A red leather briefcase appeared beside me, the man crouching to help collect my things. His hands were swift, efficiently scooping my belongings into my bag, while I scrambled to pick up the papers. Ms. Neri. The voice was deep, commanding. I looked up, following the impeccable lines of an Italian suit to meet 2 piercing blue-green eyes. It was him, Jackson Stone, and in his hand, unmistakably, was my bright red bullet vibrator. The tiny one I'd hidden at the very bottom of my bag, in a separate compartment. My breath caught. His eyes held mine for a moment before he casually dropped the vibrator back into my bag, as though he found this kind of thing every day. Straightening, he extended his hand to me. I hesitated, then placed my hand in his. He pulled me to my feet with a strength that made my pulse jump. The photos hadn't done him justice. He wasn't just tall. He was broad, commanding, and radiated a presence that seemed to fill the hallway. Jackson Stone, he said, his tone clipped. His gaze swept over me, assessing. You're meant to be upstairs, serving as my executive assistant, aren't you? The word serve sent an unexpected shiver through me. I swallowed hard, trying to focus. The man looked every inch the powerful billionaire, his dark Italian suit and crisp white shirt fitting him perfectly. For a brief moment, I forgot why I was even here. But then I remembered Bedford. My mission. My reason for taking this job. I squared my shoulders, forcing my voice to steady. Delilah Neri, I said. At least I sounded composed. For now. He turned our hands, clasping into a handshake, and looked me up and down. Between my Walmart bag, Kmart skirt, shoes and shirt and red hair tie that was struggling to hold my chestnut hair back, I can imagine how I must have looked. Like everything I owned was worth less than his briefcase. Delilah Neri, sir. Oh, right. I stammered, feeling my fragile resolve leaking away. He stood, holding my hand and staring directly into my eyes. Waiting. I took my hand back and smoothed my skirt down. Delilah Neri, sir. He handed me back my bag, picked up his briefcase from the floor, and then took the top piece of paper from the mixed-up pile I held in my hand. These are the handouts going to my investors. You need to put them back in order, and then join me on the top floor before we go to the boardroom." He put the paper back, and I glanced down at it. It was numbered page 13 of 18, and had a name printed across the top: Javier Toro. "The meeting is in 20 minutes. Don't be late." With that, he strode past me, and I knelt down to retrieve the rest of the papers. I gathered the last few, and turned around to find Mr. Stone standing behind me. He grabbed my wrist and drew me close to him. "In that room, you represent me. You do not want to let me down." He let me go and walked away, this time entering the elevator. I stood there, my heart thumping as he turned around and looked at me before the doors closed. I could still feel his fingers on my wrist, could still smell him, a mixture of soap and masculine scent. "Don't make him wait," Ms. Green said from her desk. I rushed over to an empty desk and dropped the papers on it before bolting off to the ladies' room. The door closed behind me, and I grabbed onto a cool ceramic basin, trying to calm myself. Fuck him. The thought ran across my mind with every meaning attached. I'd been face to face with the CEO of Stone Black, and the urge to slap him in the face for all his company had done was strong. But so was my next thought: to slap him in the face while he pushed me down on a bed. To have him hold down my hands while I struggled. To have him push my legs apart and fuck me. Fuck. I muttered and turned on the cold water to wash my hands to try to cool myself down. Was I really going to go through with this? My low-level job in the records department was meant to get me something to hurt Stone Black. I'd hoped for something to embarrass them at least, or something bigger to really make them sting. Now I was going to be executive assistant to the Jackson Stone, the CEO whose face and story I'd studied 100 times. A man I thought I truly hated. And now that I'd seen him in the flesh, a part of me wanted him. "Don't forget why you're here," I told myself in the mirror and adjusted my hair. I took deep breaths as I headed out to collect and sort the papers. I can do this. It was a close thing, but I got to the top floor with the sorted papers and 3 minutes to spare. I stepped out of the elevator into a simply gigantic room. Although I only had a few minutes before I was meant to be in Mr. Stone's office, I looked around. The floor was polished wood, oak, something golden and delicious. Running from the elevator in a straight line to 2 giant black mahogany doors was a pale inlay of another type of wood. Over to the right side was a desk, and across from it 2 floor-to-ceiling windows. It was like 10 times the size of my entire apartment. I walked over to the desk and saw it had a metal nameplate slotted into a holder on the front of it. Billionaire. There it was, etched in metal for all to see. I reached down and touched it with my finger. It moved sideways. It was just a piece of engraved metal, easily replaced. Just like me if I screwed up. I looked down at the rest of the desk, saw the clock, and felt a jolt run through me. Late. I didn't even have time to put my handbag down. Rushing without trying to run, I hurried over to the heavy doors and entered Mr. Stone's office. I thought the previous room was big. I rushed in, trying to take in what I was seeing without looking like I was. The floor was a darker wood that changed over at the door. There were cabinets of black and red polished wood, Asian styling in floor to ceiling windows that went almost all the way around. Mr. Stone was leaning against the front of his desk, flicking through a sheaf of papers. His desk. It was gigantic. I think it was at least twice as big as the double bed in my apartment. To the right was another room with the door closed. Private bathroom? He didn't look up. Not at my heels clacking on the wood floor, nor when I stepped onto the thick Persian rug that sat under the desk and surrounded it. I approached him, feeling like a doe wandering into a lion's den. I glanced past his shoulder at the spectacular view, and my foot caught suddenly on the rug. Down I went, falling directly forward. There was no way I was letting go of the papers again, so down they went with me. I fell directly into Mr. Stone, my face hitting his chest, my lips pressing against his shirt. I landed on my knees on the rug, but managed to save the papers. My handbag hit the ground too, but thankfully nothing came out. He looked down at me with a cruel smile. "On your knees again, Ms. Neri?" I stood up and gasped. On his shirt were 2 red lips pressed together where my face had hit him. "Do you have another shirt?" I asked, feeling like I was going to be fired on the spot. He looked down at the lipstick marks and frowned. He stood up and walked around to the back of his desk. "Lucky for you, I do." he said without a hint of humor in his voice. Turn around, he commanded. I turned around as he stripped off his shirt. In the polished surfaces of black and red, I could see at least 6 angles of his slim muscular body. I closed my eyes, but then immediately opened them again. If I was going to get fired, at least I'd enjoy the view. The papers, he said from right behind me. I jumped and turned around. He was quiet when he moved. Mr. Stone looked at me, but I couldn't read his face. Anger? Disappointment? I had a sudden desire to step forward and kiss him, or for him to pull me in close to him again, grab the back of my neck and kiss me. I don't like to repeat myself, he said and held out his hand. I gave him the papers, and he quickly flicked through them before handing them back. One to every investor. Match their names, and then take notes of anything important. A pad is over there. This way. He walked past me, and I again smelt soap and some indefinable essence of masculinity. I scurried over to the side table, put my bag down, picked up a yellow legal pad and pen, and followed him out of the room, all the while repeating to myself, don't freak out, don't freak out, don't freak out. The meeting went by in a blur. Thankfully, there were printed place names for each investor, so all I had to do was match the printouts with the place. The investors were mostly old guys with fat bellies sticking out of suits more expensive than my yearly rent. Mr. Stone was a powerful figure of youth and vitality compared to these old whales. Moving about the room, as he went over Stoneblack's latest plans regarding renewable energy in South America. I took notes the best I could, but even I was caught up in his presentation. A way to bring renewable energy to an entire continent, provide jobs and preserve the environment? This was completely at odds of what I knew about Stoneblack and their history of environmental destruction and legal trickery. Did I have it all wrong about them? Soon the meeting ended, and all the old men waddled out of the boardroom, smiling at the thought of all the money they'd be making. When the last one left the room, Mr. Stone touched me briefly on the shoulder and pointed at my notes. Type those up and then bring them to my office in 30 minutes. He walked off to talk to the investors while I packed up my stuff and scurried off to my desk. This time I wouldn't be caught off guard or rushing. I sat down at my new desk and looked down at my notes. My handwriting was doctor-level bad at the best of times. With everything that had happened today, it had devolved into some prehistoric hieroglyphics. It would take a team of linguists to translate it. With a sinking feeling, I started to transcribe the scribbled mess. About half an hour later, I heard Mr. Stone shout from behind his dark mahogany doors. Delilah! I said 30 minutes. I quickly printed what I'd managed to decipher, the printer taking a million years. It finally completed its task, and I hurried into Mr. Stone's office with papers and my original notepad. He was sitting behind his desk glowering at me. Without a word, he turned around a digital timer he had on his desk. It read 0:35 and was still counting upwards. He'd actually timed me. He held out his hand for the notes. I gave them to him and tried not to look embarrassed as he took out a black pen from his desk and started writing on them. I glanced down at the ornate chair that sat a little to the side in front of his desk. It was black mahogany like the desk and had a red velvet seat. There were small pieces of gold inlaid on the legs. I'd bet that chair cost more than my entire apartment, and maybe the apartments on either side of mine. I wonder how comfy it would be. Don't sit down, Mr. Stone said, not looking up. I looked away from the chair and out the window behind him at the amazing view, as though the thought of sitting in that chair had never crossed my mind. How did he know? Mr. Stone finally finished writing, and then gave the notes back to me, before waving his hand to the chair for me to sit down. I did, and oh, comfy. What do you think of Stoneblack? He asked, looking at me like he could read my soul. Maybe he could. Moving around like a ninja, reading my mind chair sitting. What did I think of Stoneblack? Let's see. Environmental destruction, a horde of lawyers, sneaky tricks, probably bribery and big enough to get away with it, and keep on getting away with it unless someone stopped them? Well, a big company being a big company, I said, settling on the safest response. An answer that isn't an answer, he said. What do you think of me? Oh no, this was getting crazy. What would I say now? I heard in my 3 short days in records that he fired people for nearly no reason, that a good half the girls in the building would slip off their skirts if he just asked them to? And just quietly, a few of the guys too. You're a businessman, young and in control of a growing corporation. Along with your partner, of course. Of course, he said, a brief flash of disgust crossing his face before vanishing. Was that for my stock answer, or for how he felt about his partner? On the subject of Matt Black, the interwebs were a little foggy. Apparently they'd formed their business in college, but precisely what Mr. Black did was a bit of a mystery. There was a smattering of charity ball photographs, but it seemed he liked to keep a lower profile than even Mr. Stone. They were certainly never photographed together. But what do they say? He asked, focusing his gaze on me. Don't lie to me. I felt butterflies fluttering in my stomach. Was this a test? Was the right answer to lie under pressure, or to just tell the truth? I decided to go with the truth. That you're a bastard. A beautiful one, sure, but still a bastard. Perpetually unsatisfied with a crazy temper. I tried to hold his gaze as I said it, but towards the end I just couldn't. I felt like he'd erupt and leap out of the chair at any moment. We sat there in silence for a moment, and then I glanced up at his impassive face. He caught my eye and briefly smiled at me. My God, he was handsome, like he'd just stepped off a modeling shoot. But then his smile vanished, and I suddenly felt I was standing at the bottom of a wall of ice a mile high. He stood up and moved around the desk, looking at me all the while. The butterflies in my stomach went crazy, and all I could imagine was him whispering in my ear that he knew all about me, that he'd always known. Then the police would burst in and drag me away to some gulag. Mr. Stone walked around behind the chair and placed his hands on top of it. His closeness was unnerving. I felt him lean down behind me. Everything they say is true, he said. His lips were so close to my ear. His scent again masculine and clean enveloping me. I closed my eyes and listened. I am deeply unsatisfied and I need you, Delilah. I want you to be my assistant. My neck was tingling and sending signals down my body. I felt my nipples harden and rub against my blouse. I heard what he said, but it seemed certain body parts only heard I need you. I want you. I will be your assistant, I said, catching myself in time before saying I want you too. And then he was gone. I opened my eyes to find him back around his side of the desk again, looking at me. Make those corrections and send the notes to me. I'll be gone the rest of the afternoon. Don't forget your bag, he said. I stood up and nodded, clutching the notepad like it was the only thing holding me to the ground and walked away, feeling his gaze on me. I saw him reflected in the cabinets, and I think he was looking at my ass. I picked up my bag from where I'd left it on the side table and headed for the door. I needed to get out of here before he changed his mind, or I broke out into another hot flush with my imagination and body going wild. I put my hand on the door to leave, feeling the cool wood under my palm. Delilah Neri. I turned around to see him in profile, looking at something on the computer screen. I do have a temper, and if you disobey me, you will get to see it. One more thing. You are never allowed in this room unless I am here. I nodded, and then got out of the room as fast as I could. Where was it? I rummaged through my bag again, and then took another look around the empty ladies' room, before emptying the contents out on the bench next to the basins. My red bullet vibrator was gone, or temporarily misplaced, or stolen. I'd come down here to cool off after my meeting with Mr. Stone, and found my mind straying to some very hot ideas. Mr. Stone standing catching me in his office, and shaking his head at me as he unzipped his pants. Mr. Stone pulling me across to him for a passionate kiss. But no red bullet vibrator was anywhere to be found. I sorted through the contents of my bag again, desperately hoping I'd find it hidden under a screwed up $5, or maybe hanging out next to an empty chewing gum pack. I scooped everything back into my bag, and then stopped, a cold rush flooding through me, as I got a sudden image of the vibrator, sitting on the rug under Mr. Stone's desk. I did fall over and land on the ground. Nothing fell out of my bag, but maybe I was too preoccupied with saving the papers or smearing my lipstick on his shirt. Okay, so I didn't have it with me, and that meant unless it was hiding near my desk somehow, then it was probably on the floor of Mr. Stone's office. I looked at myself in the mirror for the second time today, again trying to calm myself down. He'd just told me to never go into his office without him there. but there was no way I'd let him find that bullet vibrator in there. He'd seen it that morning and knew it was mine. I didn't care what the consequences were. Besides, he was out of the office for the rest of the day. You can do this, I told my reflection. My reflection looked back at me with raised eyebrows. I wasn't so dumb as to just go back up there and push the doors open with some stupid excuse on my lips. I went down to the car park first and saw that his black BMW was gone. So Mr. Stone was out of his office. Nevertheless, outside his office I stopped and tried to make up an excuse. I dropped my contact lens? I shook my head at myself and went in. I ignored the view and the beautiful things all around me, even the side room which I was curious about. All I was looking for was the red bullet vibrator. I checked under a few cabinets but didn't see it. I walked up to the front his desk and imagined myself falling over, holding the papers, my face heading for his chest, my bag swinging. I walked around the other side of his desk and knelt down to check under it. The space under the desk was big enough for 3 people to fit. I crawled in, looking for the bullet. Again, no luck. I did find something else though. Set into the back wall of the desk was a long golden bar. It looked like a crazy expensive bathroom fitting. I ran my finger over it and then pulled on it. It wasn't connected to any secret drawer or anything. It was just connected solidly to the mahogany. I tapped the bar again and then heard a noise. But it was no secret compartment opening. It was the doors opening. I felt myself freeze into a block of ice as I heard footsteps cross the floor. First loud on the wood, and then muffled by the carpet. Mr. Stone was in his office, and I was hiding under his desk. Maybe he'd collect something and leave. Please just pick up something and leave. Please use the blender, or whatever it was he had in that side room, so I could sneak out. Please just. He sat down in his chair as I tried not to breath while pushing myself back as far as possible. Please just leave, please just leave, please just leave. He must have heard my thoughts because I heard him move some papers on his desk, and then he stood up and walked away, his footsteps muffled by the thick rug. He was leaving, he was leaving, he was leaving. Come out now, Ms. Neri. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to make myself vanish. I promised every deity that ever was to work for them, if only they'd help me. You do not want to keep me waiting, Ms. Neri. I opened my eyes and crawled out from under his desk. Barely half an hour after saying yes to being his assistant, and he was going to fire me. I was sure of it. I stood up from behind the desk. Mr. Stone was watching me with a look on his face halfway between fury and excitement. I lost a contact lens, I mumbled, even though I was wearing glasses and had been all day. I told you not to disobey me, he said, his voice as cold as ice. He walked across the floor towards me, and I felt like running, like I was being stalked. As he circled around the left side of the desk, he pointed to the spot in front of his desk, and I scurried around there. I'm going to have to punish you, he said. He pressed his fingers on some unseen button, and a wood panel slid back before a gold bar rose out of the desk and clicked into place. Hold on to it, he said. I looked down at the polished wood and saw my own face staring back at me. My pupils were dilated. I was breathing heavily. I wanted this, whatever this was. I leaned forwards and grasped the gold bar with both hands. It was far enough back on the desk that I was now bent over with my ass sticking up in the air. My skirt wasn't coping at all and had hitched itself up. Another inch, and he'd be able to see everything. Mr. Stone walked around behind me, and I felt myself tensing up. Was he going to just pull my skirt up and fuck me? Wasn't that what I wanted? He stood directly behind me, and all I could hear was the sound of his breathing. There were no reflective surfaces in this direction, except the top of the polished desk. All I could see was myself, my breasts straining against my blouse, a few ringlets of hair hanging free of the tie. Do you trust me? He touched me, a single finger on my back. I heard my blood pound in my ears. Trust him? I barely knew him. But somehow, even bent over his desk, yes. I do, sir. If you say stop, then I will stop. Do you want me to? I shifted position slightly, my breasts rubbing on the desktop. What was he planning? And why did I want this so much? I don't want you to stop. The smack on my ass came sharp and sudden, and I yelped. What had I done? Oh, I don't want you to stop, sir. His next touch was gentle, stroking the spot he'd just hit. The pain mixed with pleasure, and I felt my temperature rising. Was he going to hike my skirt up and fuck me over his desk? The thought of this man pounding into me, as I looked out over the city. Well, I winced. He'd asked me something while I was lost in fantasy. Smack. This one was harder than before, and in the same spot. I gasped aloud and clenched the bar with both hands. You must pay attention. He smacked me again and I yelped once more. And again. And again. The sound of his hand hitting me echoed through the long room, and I felt my knees go weak. The bar was my lifeline, and I clenched it as hard as I could even as I felt bruises forming on my ass. That was 15. Disappoint me again, and it will be more. He pushed up my skirt and traced the tip of his finger over where he had spanked me. The skin was sore and throbbing, and the light touch of his finger was part pleasure and part pain. His finger traced across my ass, only momentarily touching my sex. I closed my eyes and knew that he'd be able to feel I was wet. Oh, I see, he said, his voice dangerously low. He sounded furious. His hand came down again suddenly and smacked against my ass. I managed to hold in my gasp, but without the skirt between his palm and me. It stung and brought tears to my eyes. At the same time, I felt myself get wetter. You're enjoying this, aren't you? It was a statement rather than a question. I heard a soft click, and then a low humming. I suddenly knew where my bullet vibrator was. I moaned as he pressed it against my sex. Although small, it was powerful. He slapped a yellow notepad down next to my face along with a pen. Take notes for me. I let go of the bar with my left hand, and picked up the pen. The buzz of the vibrator was zipping up through my body, down my legs, swirling across my spine. I will obey Mr. Stone. I bit my lip, and tried to still my breathing as I wrote I will obey Mr. Stone. I started well, but by the end it trailed off into a scrawl. He looked over my shoulder, and then smacked me on the ass, sending another burst of wetness through my pussy. I will obey Mr. Stone, he repeated. He moved the vibrator closer to my clit, and I felt his fingers touch me through my wet panties. I will. The pen skittered across the page as my body began to go completely off the rails. There was another crack as he spanked me again, and then suddenly he had his fingers inside me, pumping them back and forth. He moved the vibrator directly onto my clit, the buzz consuming my world. I will obey Mr. Stone, he said. I tried to write, but my muscles had gone weak. I scrawled I and dropped the pen at the pleasure rushing through my body. His legs were against mine, his fingers pumping into me, and the bullet vibrator going crazy against my clit. He said something else to me, but I didn't hear it over my wailing. I tipped over the edge, electric fingers running down every nerve, my pussy clenching around his fingers. Your cock. I want. I found myself gasping something to him when my head stopped spinning. I heard the bullet click off, and then he dropped it on the notepad. He reached forward and grabbed the back of my neck, pressing his body against mine. I could feel his hard cock through his pants. What is it you want, Delilah? I was still spinning through the universe, but I knew better than to tell him I wanted his cock. I felt his hand tense on my ass, waiting for my response. I swallowed and took a deep breath, trying to slow my pounding heartbeat. I want to obey you, sir. He let go of my neck and I stood up. I turned around to see him walking away, across to the room at the side of his office. Leave, he said, not looking at me. He slipped into the side room and slammed the door behind him. My ears burning with shame and with tears in my eyes, I picked up the notepad with my scrawled writing, my bullet vibrator, straightened my clothes, and went back to my desk. The sound of the big wooden doors closing behind me sounded like a final admonishment. I'd done something wrong. Was I meant to tell him I wanted his cock? I thought I was playing the game, but maybe I was wrong. At least he hadn't fired me for being in his office. The end of the day couldn't come soon enough. I'd spent the last few hours replying to emails from Ms. Green, who seemed to want to teach me my new job from afar rather than in person. Although I managed to concentrate long enough to get a little work done, I couldn't keep my mind off what happened. Mr. Stone bending me over his desk. Mr. Stone using my vibrator on me. I jumped when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned and looked up into Mr. Stone's blue-green eyes. He moved silently when he wanted, or when I was lost in fantasy. We won't be doing that again, he said. No, sir. Yes, we will, sir. I made you my executive assistant, although I knew it was dangerous. Dangerous, sir? For me, he added, his face unreadable. And for you. He seemed sad, but the emotion passed as quickly as it came. The mask was back. The volcano inside him hidden again. He walked away, heading for the elevator, and I leaped up out of my seat to follow him. What was I meant to say? Please do it again? Please push me over your desk, and do whatever you want to me? I'm your assistant and I'm here to serve you? I had to get hold of myself. I was here to find all of Stoneblack's dirty laundry, and having it bad for the boss wasn't going to help that. Although it was fun. The elevator door opened, and he turned to face me. I was going to say, no, sir. It won't ever happen again. But the moment I saw his eyes, I knew it would. I'd make sure it happened again. My voice was a whisper, yet seemed too loud. He stepped into the elevator and looked me up and down. Never again, Delilah. Never. The doors closed, and the moment they did, I found my voice. What came out surprised even myself. I'm yours. Sir. About the author. Emily Cantor has a last name that sounds like some kind of dance, and a mind that spends a lot of time thinking about hot and heavy moments. She writes creative smut that is based on true events and true smut based on wild times. Her stories are all works of fiction, except when they're not.